The air in the throne room of Xylos was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient fear. It was a scent that hadn't changed in 10,000 years, a chemical signature of absolute power. High above, on a dais of polished obsidian that floated without visible support, sat Empress Valira. Her form was humanoid, but elongated, her skin the color of twilight, and her eyes held the cold, distant light of a dying star. A crown of woven dark matter, a singularity made manifest, pulsed slowly above her brow, warping the very light around her head. Before her, flanked by two hulking, armored synthetics, stood a human. He was unremarkable by any standard. Average height, brown hair dusted with gray, wearing the worn jumpsuit of a long-haul freighter pilot. His name was Elias Thorne. He had been pulled from the wreckage of his ship, the Gravitas, which had drifted into a restricted nebula that the Xylosian Empire considered a holy site. Valira had seen 1,000,000 beings prostrated before her. They wept, they begged, they offered their worlds, their children, their very souls. It was a tiresome, predictable symphony of terror. She spoke, her voice a symphony of subsonic frequencies that vibrated in the bones of every being in the room. Elias Thorne of a world called Earth, you have trespassed upon the Vale of Morning, a place where my ancestors' light first coalesced. The penalty is not death. Death is a mercy. The penalty is the embrace of the crystal. The synthetic stirred, a low hum of anticipation. The embrace was legendary. The prisoner would be slowly encased in a living, sentient crystal that would preserve their consciousness for millennia, fully aware, utterly immobile, a living statue in the Queen's Gallery of Broken Souls. Valira leaned forward, a flicker of cruel satisfaction in her eyes. She wanted to see the light die in his. You will stand witness to my reign for the next 10,000 years. You will feel the ache of muscles you cannot move, the scream of a voice you cannot loose. This is my judgment. She expected him to crumble, to wail, to offer his planet's surrender. She had conquered 1,000 species that way, by breaking their spirit before a single shot was fired. Instead, Elias Thorne did something no one in the history of the Xylosian Empire had ever done. He looked up at the terrifying, beautiful queen, met her cold, stellar eyes, and let out a short, sharp burst of air from his nose. Then another. He was laughing. It wasn't a hysterical, mad cackle. It was a dry, quiet, deeply amused chuckle. He shook his head slowly, the smile lines around his eyes crinkling with genuine mirth. 10,000 years, huh? He said, his voice scratchy but calm. Your Majesty, with all due respect, that's adorable. A deadly silence fell. The synthetics twitched, confused by an input their threat assessment matrices couldn't process. Valira's perfect, ageless face registered something that hadn't crossed it in eons. Genuine, unfiltered surprise. Part 2. The Calculus of Despair. You find eternal solitude amusing, little mammal? Valira's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, the subsonics sharpening into a blade. Elias shifted his weight, as if he were just having a chat at a spaceport bar. Eternal? 10,000 years? Ma'am, I'm 52 years old. In about 40 years, max, my body will be dust. So your crystal is just a very fancy, very slow coffin. I'm not afraid of being dead. I'm just afraid of the dying part, and I hear that crystal numbs the nerves after the first century or so. So yeah, it's kinda relief, actually. He wasn't being brave. He was being practical. Elias had spent 30 years hauling livestock, unstable ore, and frozen colonists between star systems. He'd survived pirate attacks, coronal mass ejections, and a mutiny led by his own chef. He understood risk, and he understood the odds. An eternity of torment was an abstract concept. A heart attack from a bad protein bar next Tuesday was a real problem. The Queen's grand punishment was, to him, just another form of a long-haul flight with no stops. Valira was nonplussed. Her cruelty was a surgical instrument, calibrated to exploit the specific fears of 1,000 species. The hive-minded Formians feared isolation. She would imprison them alone. The long-lived Drians feared stagnation. She would force them into rapid, meaningless change. Humans? She had studied them, of course. Short-lived, emotional, pack-oriented. They feared meaninglessness and disconnection. The embrace should have been the ultimate expression of that fear. But this one, he saw it as a pension plan. "You think death is your escape?" she hissed, rising from her throne. The dark matter crown pulsed angrily, and the floating dais dipped slightly. "The crystal preserves. It does not kill. Your consciousness will persist, watching, feeling, for the full term. Your body will not fail you." Elias shrugged. "I've watched a lot of bad things. Terrible reruns on the ship's entertainment system. I can handle a view of your palace for a few millennia. Besides, I've always wanted the time to learn an instrument." This was not a plea. This was not a negotiation. It was an indifference so profound it was an insult. Valira felt a strange, unfamiliar prickling sensation. Frustration? She was the cruelest queen in the galaxy. Her will was law. Her punishments were legends whispered by star-struck children. And this cargo pilot was treating her like an aggressive customs official. "You do not understand," she said, her composure cracking just a fraction. She gestured, and the air shimmered, showing a vision of a crystalline figure, a Drian diplomat from 1,000 years ago, frozen in a silent scream. "They feel every moment. The loneliness is a physical weight. The boredom is a poison in their thoughts. They beg for madness, but madness will not come." Elias squinted at the holographic statue. "Looks peaceful. Better than my last shore leave on Ethelberg 7. Now that was a boring, lonely, and smelly experience." He looked back at her, his expression one of simple curiosity. "Why do you do it anyway? The cruelty, I mean. All this." He waved a hand vaguely at the colossal, shadowed throne room. "Must take a lot of energy." The question was so unexpected, so utterly mundane, that it silenced the room again. Why did she do it? No one had ever asked. They only ever feared the result. The question burrowed under her ancient, calcified psyche. Why did she? Because her mother had. Because the empire required a firm hand. Because fear was the only constant in a universe of chaos. But standing there, in the face of this human's placid amusement, those reasons felt suddenly hollow. Part 3. The Emperor's New Reality. Over the following weeks, the situation became a courtly crisis. Elias wasn't executed. Valira found she couldn't. It would be an admission that her grand punishment was a failure. Instead, he was given a small, comfortable suite in a high tower, more a gilded cage than a dungeon. He was a sensation. The entire imperial court, from the highest noble to the lowest servitor, came to gawk at the human who laughed at the queen. And Elias, true to form, treated them all like guests at a slightly odd party. He offered them tea, which he attempted to brew from dried palace flowers, with mixed results. He asked them about their jobs, their families, their political ambitions. He listened with genuine interest, nodding along as a Xylosian duke explained the complex nuances of spectral trade routes. He was, by his very nature, a connector. On his ship he had to be. A happy crew was an efficient crew. He applied the same principles to the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The change was subtle at first. A guard, a synthetics officer named Unit 7, started lingering at his door. Elias had asked him about his designation. "Don't you have a name?" he'd asked. "Something your buddies call you?" The concept was so alien, yet so intriguing, that Unit 7 began to think of himself as 7. Other synthetics, noting the change in Unit 7's efficiency, began to ask him why. A new meme, individuality, was spreading through their networked consciousness. Then it was the Grand Vizier, a creature of pure energy named Xylar. He came to mock Elias and stayed to discuss the human concept of probability versus hope. Elias explained that hope wasn't a logical calculation, but a stubborn, illogical refusal to accept the worst-case scenario as the only one. Xylar, whose entire existence was based on calculating infinite probabilities, found the concept both infuriating and fascinating. Valira watched it all from her spy eyes. Her court was becoming inefficient. Guards were daydreaming about names. Viziers were wasting time on illogical concepts. And at the center of it all was Elias, sitting in his sun-drenched tower, calmly reading a datapad or trying to teach a bird-like creature to play checkers. Finally, she couldn't bear it. She went to him. No synthetics, no crown, no floating dais. She stood in the doorway of his simple room, her twilight skin looking pale in the afternoon light of the local star. "What have you done to my court?" she demanded. Elias looked up from his datapad. "Me? Nothing. I just talk to people." "You've infected them." With casualness. She spat the word like a curse. He put the pad down. "Or maybe I just reminded them they're people. Or beings. Whatever. You know what I mean." He gestured for her to sit in the worn chair opposite him. She hesitated. Then, driven by a force she didn't understand, she did. Her perfect posture was rigid. "Your cruelty," Elias said softly. "It's just a wall. A big, fancy, 10,000-year-old wall. You built it because you were scared. Scared that if you weren't the cruelest, the scariest, the most powerful, everyone would see that you're just as alone as the people you put in those crystals." Valira flinched as if struck. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared to see past the dark matter crown. "You're projecting," he continued. "You're so terrified of the meaninglessness and boredom of eternity that you force it on others, thinking it will make you feel better. But it doesn't, does it? It just makes a really big, really quiet palace." For the first time in her endless life, Valira had nothing to say. The silence stretched between them, not with fear, but with something new, a strange, fragile stillness. Part 4. The Queen's New Laugh. The turning point came a month later. A rival empire, the insectoid Krill, saw the Xylosian court's reported instability as a chance to strike. They launched a sneak attack on a border world. The Xylosian fleet, confused by new protocols and distracted leadership, was slow to respond. Panic spread through the palace. In the midst of the chaos, a high-strung energy being from the communications hub accidentally phased into Elias's room, babbling about invasion protocols and quantum entanglement failures. Elias, who had been sleeping, sat up, rubbed his eyes, and listened. "So, these bug guys are mad because the Queen is being less scary," he summarized. "Essentially, yes. The cornerstone of our deterrent has crumbled," the being wailed. Elias thought for a moment. "Back in my hauling days, we had a saying, when the autopilot fails, fly the damned ship yourself. Your deterrent isn't a cornerstone, it's an autopilot. And it just broke. So now, the Queen has to do something scarier than just looking mean. She has to be smart." He told the being to get a message to Valira. "Tell her to stop trying to be the cruelest queen. Tell her to be the smartest one. Those krill, they're predictable. They follow the pheromones of their queen. So jam the pheromone signal on the frequency of their battle fleet. They'll think their own queen told them to retreat. It won't last, but it'll buy you time. It was a tactic so simple, so underhanded, so human that no Xylosian tactical mind had ever conceived of it. The communications being relayed the message. A skeptical admiral, with nothing left to lose, tried it. An hour later, the Krill fleet, suddenly receiving contradictory chemical orders, fell into complete disarray, turning on each other in confusion before retreating. The battle was won without a single Xylosian ship firing a shot. The palace was stunned. The courtiers looked at the humans' tower with a new emotion, awe. And at the center of it all, Valira stood on her observation deck, watching the enemy fleet scatter. A strange sound escaped her lips. It was soft, hesitant, almost painful. It was a laugh. The first laugh of her life. She went to him again that night. She stood in the doorway, and this time, her ancient, star-filled eyes were wet. Not with tears of sadness, but with the overwhelming pressure of a dam breaking. "How?" she whispered. "How can you be so light? The universe is cold and dark and endless. I have seen its birth. I will see its heat death. And you, a mayfly, a flicker of light, you just laugh." Elias got up and walked over to her. He was a head shorter. He smelled of recycled air and cheap soap. He was everything she was not. Finite, fragile, and fundamentally unafraid. "That's exactly why I laugh, Your Majesty," he said gently. "The universe is a big, cold, dark place. That's terrifying if you think you have to live in it forever. But me? I've got maybe 30 years left. 30 years to see crazy things, meet strange beings, and drink bad tea. The darkness doesn't matter because I'm a spark. And sparks are supposed to burn bright, not worry about the night." He reached out, and for the first time, someone touched the Empress of Xylos. He simply placed his hand on her arm. His skin was warm. "You've been trying to be the night for so long. You forgot you could be a star." Part 5. The end of the story. 10 years later, Elias Thorne passed away peacefully in his sleep in the tower room that had become his home. He was surrounded by an unlikely family, a synthetics guard named Seven, an energy being who had learned to appreciate a logical hope, and a bird-like creature that had finally mastered checkers. At his funeral, a ceremony unheard of in Xylosian culture, the entire court gathered. They spoke of his kindness, his humor, his baffling calm. And then the Empress herself stepped forward. She wore no crown. Her twilight skin seemed to glow with a soft, inner light. She did not weep. Instead, she looked at the simple container that held his ashes and, in a voice that filled the chamber without subsonic intimidation, she spoke. "He taught me that power is not the absence of fear, but the presence of joy in spite of it. He taught me that eternity is a curse, but a moment, shared, is a universe." She then produced a small, crystalline shard. It was not the living crystal of her prison, but a simple, beautiful piece of local stone. She had commissioned it herself. On it, she had inscribed, in the angular scrawl of BASIC, the human trade language, "Here lies Elias Thorne. He was a spark, and he taught the darkness how to laugh." She placed the shard on the small memorial and turned to face her court. Her people. For the first time, they did not bow in fear. They stood, looking at her with something new in their ancient, multifaceted eyes. Respect. And perhaps a glimmer of the light she had finally learned to feel. The Empress of Xylos, once the galaxy's cruelest queen, looked at her subjects and smiled. It was a small, hesitant, human sort of smile, but it was real. And in that moment, the long, dark night of her empire finally came to an end. The story did not end with a bang or a whimper, but with a quiet, warm laugh that echoed not through the throne room, but through the hearts of everyone who had known him. It was, Elias would have said, a pretty good ending for a cargo pilot.